Hello and welcome back to the second of our 2022 Summer Webinar and Open House series, Dr. Karen's 2022 update on where do you get your iron and vitamin B12 on a raw food and/or plant-based diet. Over the last several years of summer webinars, we've looked at a variety of health topics such as ketogenic diets, intermittent fasting, misconceptions about fruit, calorie density and weight management, how our immune system works, and where to get specific nutrients like calcium, iron, vitamin D, and vitamin B12, all in relationship to a whole food, plant-based dietary approach. For those of you who don't know us yet, I'm Dr. Rick Dina, and you'll be hearing from Dr. Karen Dina in a few minutes. We're both chiropractic physicians who have been on the whole food plant-based path for 35 and 34 years each, respectively, essentially all of our adult lives, and are board certified and licensed in the state of California. We've hosted plant-based summits for the past 7 years where we've interviewed successful, healthy, long-term raw vegan educators and plant-based doctors to share with you how you can be successful on this path over the long term as well. We're also the authors of the Raw Food Nutrition Handbook. Now you can see here the banners for the first 5 years all said something about raw food. In 2021, we worked with Better Life Summits and had our Energy Reset Summit where we branched out a bit further and had more of our plant-based doctor colleagues join us while still having many raw food educators as well. In thinking further about what the clearest message is for what we're the biggest advocates of, which is including an abundance of fresh fruits and vegetables as part of a whole food plant-based diet, we called our summit the Fruit and Vegetable Power Summit. As those of you who joined us for it recall, the questions and discussions were generally centered around fruit and vegetable-based eating, as well as topics that support eating as many of them as you can enjoy and improving your health as a result, such as chefs sharing recipes, how fasting fits in, how plant-based eating affects our hormones, etc. We like this theme and we plan on sticking with it for years to come. Our approach can be summed up by whole food, all plant, based on fruits and vegetables. Now within that framework, we are very inclusive and affirming, while at the same time encouraging people to derive as much of their diets from fresh fruits and vegetables as they can comfortably enjoy. We're not going to make anybody wrong for eating quinoa, chickpeas, or steamed kale or broccoli, or even if they're a veggie-friendly omnivore who's heading in the direction of including more fruits and vegetables and other whole natural plant foods in their diets. No matter where you are on this path, if heading in this direction sounds reasonable and desirable to you, better yet exciting, that's great. From just getting started to having been there yourself for many years or maybe even decades and wanting further education and refinement. Speaking of further education and refinement, we are the developers and instructors of the year-long Mastering Raw Food Nutrition online and interactive plant-based curriculum that we're going into our 7th year of teaching. We're also the developers and instructors of the precursor to that course, the Science of Raw Food Nutrition, that we taught for 10 years live and in person. For those of you interested, we'll share more about our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition plant-based curriculum later on in the webinar. Now, over the years, we have become known for our thoroughness and our scientific accuracy, as well as our ability to make complex subjects easy to understand and to see how each detail fits into a cohesive whole. We're also known for our encouraging approach that takes unnecessary hurdles out of people's way, and we're known to be authentic, straightforward, and no nonsense. We tell it like it is, and we let the information and the results speak for themselves. Before we continue, we would like to let you know that the information and opinions expressed by us in this webinar are not intended to be used as medical advice and should not be used to diagnose or treat any medical condition or as a substitute for individual health care. This webinar is presented with the understanding that we're not liable for misconception, misuse, or adverse effects resulting from its use. Any type of dietary change, nutritional therapy, or fasting should always be undertaken with the supervision of a qualified healthcare practitioner. Now, we may end up guiding you as students, as clients, as patients, but please understand that watching this webinar does not establish a doctor-patient relationship. Each one of the webinars we've had in the past, including this year as well, all follow the same basic structure. They start with the introduction that we're just about at the end of now, and then they go on to briefly describe Dr. Karen's background and my background. Now this year we're going to keep it very, very brief, but in past years we've gone into more depth and detail about some of our backgrounds, what got us started on this path, and what experiences we had early on that have led us to what we're still doing today. Every year, we use the same background introductions for each webinar that year, but year to year, it's different. So 2020 is different than 2021, different than 2019, but all 2019s are the same, all 2020s are the same. I think you understand. Then we have webinar-specific sample educational content, which is different for every webinar. Sometimes we borrowed things from one or another, but for the most part, they're all different. And in addition to providing valuable information, what those webinars do that we're about to see in a few minutes after the backgrounds is they give you sample teaching content. So if you're thinking about joining us in the future to continue your education with plant-based nutrition, you'll get an idea of how we teach so you know what to expect in the course. If you never join us again in the future and you just want to go watch all the different webinars, you can learn a lot and hopefully get a lot of value out of them. Then, for those of you interested in continuing with us, we talk about our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition, what you can expect, what the outcomes are, why people join us, and then how the content is delivered so you can see if that's a good fit for you. Then if you're here live or for a live replay, we'll be here to answer questions about the webinar content or about our educational offerings at the end. If you are watching a recording, then we're not here at the end. However, you can either, if you're already on our email list or you'd like to join it by going to rawfoodeducation.com and putting in your email address, then you can take a look at your inbox for future live webinars where we will be there at the end to answer any questions that you have. So now that the introduction is complete, we'll move on to a few minutes of Dr. Karen's background.
I found raw food at a time when I was experiencing notable fatigue for which there was apparently no answer. I was in college at the time and I was sleeping 10, 12, and sometimes even more hours per night, and still waking up non-refreshed. I saw 3 medical professionals, and after multiple lab tests and evaluations, I had a diagnosis: fatigue of unknown origin. They had a whole list of everything that I didn't have, but could not pinpoint the source of my fatigue. I asked every single one of them if my fatigue may have had anything to do with my college diet and lifestyle. They all emphatically said no. Things really started to change, however, when a friend gave me a copy of a book that discussed vegan diets and the connection between diet and health. I also learned about the connections between diet and the environment and the way animals are treated. And with all these compelling arguments, I was open to giving this approach a try, and I became vegan. In addition to feeling good about eating compassionately and leaving a lighter footprint on the earth, I was so excited to find that my fatigue actually started to improve, despite what the so-called experts, in this case the medical professionals, said would happen. This personal experience opened the door to my thinking that diet really could make a difference in health and left me open to exploring other opportunities. When I learned about and implemented a raw food diet, my energy soared far beyond the impressive improvements that I experienced by eating vegan. Long story short, my fatigue vanished, along with a variety of other symptoms that I'd had for years, and I had more energy than I knew what to do with. I could not remember a time when I felt better, I started to look healthier and I slept better. I enjoyed exercising and my digestion improved. I was so inspired by the health results I was experiencing that I felt compelled to learn more about the inner workings of the human body, nutrition, and the diet-health connection. I really wanted to immerse myself in learning as much as I could, so I earned a second undergraduate degree in biology and then received doctorate-level education in naturopathic medicine and chiropractic, which helped me to put everything that I observed into perspective and on a much deeper level. Over the years, I've refined and revised my approach to raw food and tailored it to my individual needs. And we can show you how to do this too. Next, Dr. Rick will share with you a bit about his background and experience with raw food and plant-based nutrition. So take it away, Dr. Rick.
Here are a couple of before and after photos from my late teens. In the process of going from the photo on the left to the photo on the right, as you can probably imagine, I felt so much better. This inspired me to keep learning as much as I could. So I read tons of books, magazines, I attended conferences, I listened to audio programs while driving in the car, and filled myself up with as much great information as I could. The National Health Association, known then as the ANHS, or American Natural Hygiene Society, was one of the primary educational resources for me at that time, and it has been ever since. Couple of quick highlights. While I was a junior in college, I water fasted for 14 days in my college dorm. Everyone thought I was crazy, but it was an incredible experience, and most of my childhood allergies that were giving me trouble the day that this photo was taken were almost completely gone after that. Later that year, at the end of my junior year, I skipped spring weekend where all the bands were coming and there were lots of great parties to drive several hours to attend a different organization's natural hygiene conference. And my friends thought I was crazy with that too, but it was an incredible experience. Like I mentioned previously in the introduction, in past years I've included more details about my background, such as athletic endeavors, race times, etc. So if you're interested, you can check those out. But for now, we'll keep it succinct and keep things moving. After finishing college, I moved down to Florida to work at Hippocrates Health Institute. After leaving there, I traveled around the United States with the Juice Man Company, selling juicers and sharing with people about the benefits of fruits and vegetables and their juices. Then I wanted to go back to school, so I went to chiropractic school to earn a doctorate degree, and from all of the science classes I took there, my level and my depth of understanding everything I knew up to that point about nutrition, and so much of what I've learned since then, all increased dramatically. Graduating from that program also allowed me to join the fasting staff at True North Health, and I was there for 4 years. During that time, I got to see what happens with several hundred patients when we get out of the way and allow the body to heal itself. It was absolutely extraordinary. Now, at that point, I was stolen away by my girlfriend at the time, who was attending Bastyr University, and I contacted them and actually put a curriculum together and taught a class there to the naturopathic medical students. As it turns out, my girlfriend at the time was Dr. Karen, so there was a good reason for leaving True North, but it really took something big to get me to leave True North because I was very much in my element there. So, skipping ahead a few years, we had a chiropractic practice and we were consulting with people nutritionally, and then Karen and I got together in between patients and evenings and weekends over a few years and put together a curriculum known as the Science of Raw Food Nutrition. We taught that live and in person for 10 years until the school we were teaching at closed, and then since 2016, we've been teaching our online 12-month updated, expanded, improved curriculum that we continue to update each year called Mastering Raw Food Nutrition. During the years also, I've worked with several hundred people individually, guiding them dietarily, including lab work, and a lot of what I've learned there and insights that I've gotten incorporate into our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition curriculum. So we bring all of this together. And again, at the end, you can learn more about the program. We've now covered the introduction, and you've heard from Dr. Karen and myself about our backgrounds. Having said that, we'll now move on to our educational topic for this webinar.
As Dr. Rick mentioned earlier, the topic for this webinar is my 2022 update of where do you get your iron and vitamin B12 on a raw food or plant-based diet. Our first nutrient that we're going to talk about is iron. Now, iron is an element, and for nutritional purposes, we can call it a mineral. It's involved in a number of activities in the body, including the formation of red blood cells. And in red blood cells, iron is involved in carrying oxygen from our lungs to our tissues and in carrying carbon dioxide from our tissues back to our lungs, where it can be exhaled as a waste product. Essentially, iron plays an important role in the oxygenation of our tissues. Sometimes when people are low in iron and they have an iron deficiency, then their body's ability to oxygenate its tissues is compromised. So sometimes these people experience fatigue. Now, when I was experiencing fatigue in college, an iron test was one of the lab tests that I was given. Now, as it turned out, I was not iron deficient, so my doctors looked onto other possibilities. Now, other functions iron is involved with in our body include energy production and immune system function, among others. Now, there's two main dietary forms of iron, the heme form and the non-heme form. The heme form is found in animal foods and in supplements. And when I say animal foods, I'm mostly referring to red meat. Now, many different supplements I've seen contain the heme form of iron, and how I can tell is by looking on the supplement bottle or container in the ingredient list, and if I see the words ferrous sulfate, that means that the supplement contains the heme form of iron. The non-heme form of iron is the type of iron that is found in plant foods. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but many times I've heard people say that the iron found in animal foods is more easily absorbed than the type of iron that's found in plant foods. And my answer to that idea is this. It's a little bit more specific than that. And as it turns out, the form of iron found in plant foods is more selectively absorbed than the iron found in animal foods. And what that means is that with the non-heme form of iron, the iron status of the person affects absorption. So this form of iron is absorbed more readily when it's needed by the body and less readily when it's not needed, which is actually really good because iron is a really important mineral, but we don't want too much of it. Now, the heme form of iron is less selectively absorbed, which means that the body absorbs this form of iron whether or not it needs it. Having enough iron is important, but too much can potentially be problematic, because iron can cause free radical damage to body tissues, in addition to other problems. Now, there are some substances that we find in some foods that can bind to iron, making it less usable by the human body. Oxalic acid, also known as oxalate, is one of those substances. Oxalate binds to iron and certain other minerals, making them less usable by our body. Oxalate is found in a number of foods, but certain foods are very high in oxalate, making them not good sources of iron. Examples would include spinach, Swiss chard, beet greens, and parsley. It's important to note that these are not bad foods. They're just not good sources of iron, especially when they're raw. Many of these foods actually have a lot of iron, but most of that iron is bound to oxalate and therefore not usable by our body. It's important to note that oxalate will not steal iron or other minerals from your body, so that's good to know. Now, here's a table showing the oxalic acid content of some of the foods that we just mentioned. As you can see, parsley, chives, purslane, spinach, and beet greens are much higher in oxalic acid than others that are further down on the table. Now, it's difficult to avoid oxalic acid altogether, but if we focus our diet on lower oxalate foods, Less of our dietary iron will be bound to oxalate and will therefore be more available for use by our body for important processes such as the formation of red blood cells and assisting with carrying oxygen from our lungs to our tissues. Once again, focusing one's diet on lower oxalate foods, such as those in this table here, can increase the amount of bioavailable iron in our diet. Now, these foods are good sources of iron and are low in oxalate, and they would include kale, dandelion greens, broccoli, romaine lettuce, bok choy, and many others. The foods on this table are just examples. I mention them here because they're popularly consumed on raw food and plant-based diets. Now, I've seen people focus on spinach as their main leafy green without knowing that much of the iron in spinach is bound to oxalate. This is one of the reasons why I encourage people to include a variety of leafy greens in their diet, rather than focusing on just one or two. On this table, we see that 3 cups of chopped kale contain 3.42 milligrams of iron, and 2 cups of dandelion greens loosely packed contain 3.41 milligrams of iron. These numbers are excellent. Now, if we compare these amounts to the daily value for iron, we see that they certainly are impressive. The iron RDA for men and postmenopausal women is 8 milligrams and 18 milligrams for premenopausal women. The iron content of broccoli, romaine lettuce, and bok choy are also great. Some non-leafy green sources of iron are listed on this table. We see that chia seeds, sesame seeds, pumpkin seeds, and hemp seeds also contain significant amounts of iron. An important thing to mention here is that nuts and seeds, while they do have iron, also contain a substance or anti-nutrient called phytic acid, also known as phytate. Phytate binds to iron, magnesium, calcium, and zinc in the food that contains them, making these minerals less available for use by the human body. Here is a slide showing the phytate content of certain foods. As you can see, certain nuts, seeds, and grains are the highest in phytate when compared to the fruits and vegetables that are further down on the table. Now, just because these foods are higher in phytate does not mean that they're bad foods. It just means that they're not going to be our best sources of iron. However, this is where soaking comes in. You've likely heard that soaking nuts and seeds can help to release enzyme inhibitors, which is true. Additionally, research has shown that soaking also inactivates phytate. In other words, when you soak your nuts and seeds, you can decrease the phytate content of these foods, allowing iron to be more available for use by the body. In this case, soaking has a dual purpose: breaking down of enzyme inhibitors for improved digestion and inactivation of phytate for increased iron availability. Here's how it works. Soaking activates the enzyme phytase in nuts, seeds, and grains, which breaks down phytate. Sprouting will also help activate phytase. Soaking may also decrease phytate through the leaching of phytate into the water. In other words, not only does soaking inactivate phytate, it can also lead to the movement of phytate from the food into the water. Now, you may be asking yourself, how much of a difference can soaking and sprouting make in phytate content? That's a good question. This table shows the results of a study that compared the difference in iron availability between unsoaked, soaked, and sprouted sorghum grain. Now, I know that grains are controversial, and I'm not suggesting that anyone eat sorghum grain or any other type of grain. I'm just using this as an example to illustrate the difference in iron availability. As you can see, soaking and sprouting certainly appeared to make a significant difference, and other available research mirrors these findings. To summarize, before we move forward, we have seen that soaking and sprouting can be beneficial for helping improve availability of minerals like calcium and iron by breaking down phytic acid. By contrast, oxalate is not affected by soaking or sprouting, and most high oxalate foods are leafy greens, which don't lend themselves to soaking and sprouting anyway. So we suggest focusing on lower oxalate greens for iron. Now, one other thing I'd like to mention before we move forward is a bacterium called Oxalobacter formigenes. Maybe you've heard of it. Now, Oxalobacter formigenes is an anaerobic bacterium that commonly inhabits the human gut and uses oxalate as its major energy source. Oxalobacter formigenes, like other probiotics, needs food to survive. And since Oxalobacter formigenes' favorite food is oxalate, it makes sense that Oxalobacter formigenes would survive well in the microbiome of people who consume some oxalate. In this way, having some oxalate in one's diet can help to promote microbiome diversity. So what it comes down to is that having some oxalate in our diet might actually be helpful for the reason that we mentioned here, that it can help to promote microbiome diversity. And there are other probiotics that are being studied for their ability to consume oxalate, including Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium species. So it's not just Oxalobacter formigenes that has been studied for its ability to consume oxalate. Now, in this next section, I'd like to talk a little bit about the iron content of common fruits, because we often hear that fruit is a good source of antioxidant and calories in the form of simple carbohydrates like fructose, but not really all that much else. Now, I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about fruit as being a good source of minerals, so let's take a look and see for ourselves. So if we look at this table here, we have some common fruits like mulberries, dates, durian, blackberries, raspberries, persimmons, strawberries, apricots, bananas, and grapes. And we see single serving sizes here. And as we can see, with a lot of them, the iron content can be quite significant. Like, for example, 1 cup of mulberries has 2.59 milligrams of iron in it. Compare that to the daily values, that's actually pretty good. And then dates and durian, 1 cup of each of those have 1.50 milligrams of iron in the case of the dates, and 1.04 milligrams in the case of the durian. That actually is pretty good. Now, what about amounts of fruit here that raw foodists actually eat? So once again, we've got mulberries, blackberries, raspberries, persimmons, strawberries, apricots, and banana. And with mulberries, we have 3 cups. Same thing with blackberries and raspberries. Persimmons, 6 fruits. Strawberries, about 2 pounds. That's not unusual for a raw foodist to eat that much. I know that sounds probably unusual to some of you. And then 15 apricots and 8 peeled bananas. So 3 cups of mulberries has almost 8 milligrams of iron in it. That's really, really impressive. That's pretty close to the daily value for men and postmenopausal women. 3 cups of blackberries, 2.68 milligrams, really good. Raspberries, 3 cups, 2.55 milligrams. Persimmons, 6 of them, is 3.75 milligrams of iron. 2 pounds of strawberries, 3.74 milligrams of iron. So really amazing to see here. In other words, it's interesting to see that fruit eaten in quantity can provide, in some cases, a really significant amount of iron. Now, some people like to look at per calorie comparison. So for those of you who are interested, I thought that I would provide this information for you. So the iron content of common fruits in 100 calorie amounts. So as we can see here, the ones that we mentioned earlier, mulberries, blackberries, raspberries, and strawberries, apricots, they're all the highest in iron per calorie. Now, it's very interesting to see the nutrient content of individual foods, but how much iron do we find in foods when they're eaten together? We have an example here of a medium-sized salad that has 4 cups of romaine lettuce, 2 cups of dandelion greens, 1 cup of grated cucumber, 1 cup of grated carrots, 1 cup of chopped tomato. And we have a simple dressing made with 1 tablespoon of sesame tahini and 1 tablespoon of fresh squeezed lemon juice. All of these ingredients have a total of 9.3 milligrams of iron. This is excellent when we compare to the recommended dietary allowances for iron. Once again, the iron RDA for men and postmenopausal women is 8 milligrams and 18 milligrams for premenopausal women. From this salad and dressing, we have exceeded the iron daily value for men and postmenopausal women. Here are some photos of the salad and dressing, and as you can see, this salad is the size of a mixing bowl. For us, this is a medium-sized salad. Here's a larger salad with a few different ingredients for comparison. So in this salad, we have 8 cups of chopped romaine lettuce, 3 cups of chopped dandelion greens, 1 cup of grated cucumber, 1 cup of grated carrots, and 1 cup of chopped tomato. For the dressing, we have 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, 1 cup of red bell pepper, 1 tablespoon of almonds, 1 tablespoon of sesame seeds unhulled, 1 cup of zucchini, and 1 tablespoon of chia seeds, all blended into a dressing. So for all of these ingredients together, we have 13.4 milligrams of iron, and that's for 488 calories. That's really impressive. And here's a photo of the salad with the dressing. As you can see, this salad is in a large mixing bowl. Very often I'll hear people talk about oxalate and phytate as being problematic for iron absorption, but what's actually going to help with iron absorption? I'd like to talk a little bit about vitamin C, because vitamin C helps to make the iron in plant foods more absorbable. Many raw foods are excellent sources of vitamin C, and combining them in the same meal with foods high in iron can really help to increase their effectiveness. A number of foods that are rich in iron are also rich in vitamin C. They oftentimes come together, and here is a table for us to take a look at. We've got kale, broccoli, romaine lettuce, bok choy, dandelion greens, strawberries, mulberries, blackberries, and raspberries. So as we can see here, some of these foods are a significant source of vitamin C. For example, kale, broccoli, and romaine lettuce. And then the ones further down here are pretty good as well. Bok choy, dandelion greens, strawberries, mulberries, blackberries, and raspberries. Those eaten in quantity can be a significant source of vitamin C. And the amounts of iron are listed in the column next to the vitamin C. And as we can see here, these sources of vitamin C can also be a significant source of iron. The ones at the bottom, once again, the mulberries, blackberries, and raspberries, if they're eaten in quantity, they can be both a good source of vitamin C and iron. And in addition, adding a little bit of lemon to your salad can also help with the absorption of iron, because lemon is high in vitamin C. And on this slide, we have a variety of smoothies that contain leafy greens along with high vitamin C fruits. Our next topic for this webinar is vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is also known as cobalamin. That's a scientific name for it. It's essential since the body does not make it, and it's needed for important body functions, including the formation of every cell in our body, because it's involved in genetic code, DNA, and RNA replication. When a cell divides to form a new cell, all of the DNA from the mother cell must be replicated perfectly for the daughter cell. Vitamin B12 plays an important role in this process. Vitamin B12 is also involved in the maintenance of the covering of nerve cells called the myelin sheath. Myelin helps with the propagation of nervous system signals through neurons, and in vitamin B12 deficiency, that myelin can become disrupted, leading to neurologic symptoms. Vitamin B12 is also involved in serotonin production. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter, or a brain biochemical involved in creating the moods of happiness. Vitamin B12 also keeps homocysteine levels appropriately low. Homocysteine is related to heart disease, and vitamin B12 breaks it down. Now, I know that vitamin B12 is a huge topic of conversation in the raw and plant-based communities, but I'd like to mention that vitamin B12 deficiency is not just an issue for vegans, vegetarians, and raw foodists. My classic example is the Framingham Offspring Study. Now, this study was published in the year 2000, so this information is not new. It's been around for quite some time and is well understood. In this study, there were almost 3,000 people, and 39% of them were in the low normal or deficient range for vitamin B12. And what was fascinating about this study was that the study participants were not vegetarian, vegan, or raw foodists. They were all omnivores. They were all eating animal foods. Now, this surprises people because oftentimes animal foods are thought to be good or reliable sources of vitamin B12. But this study shows us otherwise. Vitamin B12 is a concern for everybody. Very often I'm asked about food sources of vitamin B12 and how reliable they are. Are fermented foods a good source of vitamin B12? And what about seaweed? Can these foods have vitamin B12 in them? And the answer is that some fermented foods can have vitamin B12, but not all. So fermented foods, unfortunately, are not a reliable source of B12. Since vitamin B12 is made from certain types of bacteria, the fermentation mixture would have to contain this bacteria, which is not reliably the case. Most studies I've seen have shown that fermented foods are not a reliable source of vitamin B12. And the same is true for sea vegetables. Studies I've seen that were done on nori seaweed revealed that freshly harvested nori contains human bioactive B12, but once the nori is dried, the human bioactive B12 is converted into B12 analogs, which are molecules that look like vitamin B12 but don't have the same activity in the human body. Unfortunately, rehydrating the nori does not reactivate the vitamin B12. This is likely where some of the confusion with vitamin B12 in sea vegetables comes from. Now, what about the vitamin B12 that lives in our intestines? It is true that we can have bacteria in our large intestine that produces vitamin B12. But unfortunately, vitamin B12 is absorbed in the small intestine. So the vitamin B12 that is in the large intestine cannot travel backwards into the small intestine. So unfortunately, we can't use that vitamin B12 that's made by the bacteria living in our large intestine. So what's the most reliable source of vitamin B12? The answer is supplementation. But if someone has trouble absorbing or is very deficient in vitamin B12, their doctor may have them get an injection. There are several different forms of vitamin B12 available in supplements, and they would include methylcobalamin, adenosylcobalamin, also known as adenosylcobalamin, I've heard both pronunciations, cyanocobalamin, and hydroxycobalamin. So let's take a look at methylcobalamin first. Now, methylcobalamin is a human bioactive form of vitamin B12. It's involved in a number of methylation reactions in the body. In fact, it's very important for those reactions. Now, up here on the screen, I show the folate vitamin B12 methionine homocysteine cycle. I'm not going to go into the biochemistry here. I just want to show you that methylcobalamin plays a very important role in the formation of DNA synthesis, cell maturation, especially red blood cells. It's also involved in the formation of SAM, S-adenosylmethionine, and serotonin production. In addition, vitamin B12 is involved in other things in the body. These are the main things that methylcobalamin is involved in. Methylcobalamin is available in supplemental form, and it is the form that Dr. Rick and I have been using for many years, and we've gotten some good results with it. The next form that we're going to take a look at is adenosylcobalamin, or adenosylcobalamin. Now, adenosylcobalamin is also one of the human bioactive forms of vitamin B12. The other forms of cobalamin can be transformed into adenosylcobalamin in the body when necessary. Adenosylcobalamin is the storage form of vitamin B12. Now, vitamin B12 can be stored in our liver, and this is the form in which it is stored. Now, the other forms of vitamin B12 are more popularly found in supplemental form, but I'm starting to see more adenosylcobalamin supplements out there. Now, the next supplemental form that we're going to talk about is cyanocobalamin. Cyanocobalamin is one of the most common supplemental forms of vitamin B12. It has the longest shelf life and stability and has the most research around it. Lots of studies have been done on it. Like I mentioned, cyanocobalamin has a long shelf life, so supplement manufacturers like to make it because it can sit on a shelf for years and still work, whereas other forms may not have as long of a shelf life. And cyanocobalamin is synthetic. It's made in a laboratory. It's not found in nature. And it's not a human bioactive form of vitamin B12. When someone takes a cyanocobalamin supplement, their body will need to convert it into a human bioactive form like methylcobalamin or adenosylcobalamin. Next, let's take a look at hydroxycobalamin. Hydroxycobalamin is the form of vitamin B12 that is produced by bacteria in nature. It's the only one of the forms that we've discussed that is made in nature. But it's not a human bioactive form of vitamin B12. So if someone eats a food with hydroxycobalamin in it, or takes a hydroxycobalamin supplement, their body will need to convert it into one of the human bioactive forms. So I've provided this information on vitamin B12 forms with you here today, just so you can understand what these forms actually are, whether or not they occur in nature, whether or not they are human bioactive. All of these things are important considerations. But one of the most important things to consider here, of course, is whether or not these forms are going to work for you. And in our clinical practice, we have heard of people who have tried different forms and they've worked well for them, and other people have tried other forms that haven't worked well for them. And the best way to tell if your vitamin B12 supplement is working for you is to get a vitamin B12 test. Now, there's a lot more that we can cover about all of the topics that we've talked about today. In our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition class, we go into much greater depth on these topics and lots of other topics in the raw food and plant-based nutrition world.
Now that we've finished our educational content for this webinar, we'll move on to take a look at our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition plant-based curriculum. In today's webinar, we touched on just a sliver of what we have to offer. For those of you wishing to continue your education with us, you may want to consider our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition online and interactive curriculum. It's a one-year program, and our next group program begins on August 31st, 2022. We recommend a time commitment of 4 to 5 hours per week in order to get the maximum value out of this class. So if you're excited about spending a few hours a week learning for a year and cover the financial commitment, you can dramatically increase your chances for success and enjoy the learning process while you're at it. I'll first tell you about some of the topics we cover in the course, and then I'll go into how it's actually delivered. So first of all, we cover a huge array of topics in the curriculum. Pretty much everything you ever wanted to know about plant-based and raw food nutrition based on our decades of personal research, course development, education, and clinical experience in this field. We cover so many topics: energy healing and calorie density, not just related to weight management, but how you see the overall big picture of health. Dr. Karen then goes into the basics of nutrition, which covers an overview of how so many of these later on topics fit into the big picture. Blood sugar regulation, raw food sources of nutrients, calcium and vitamin D, vitamin B12, essential fats, one of my favorite topics, acid-alkaline balance, cleansing and detoxification. We spend 2 hours an entire week on where do you get your protein. Dr. Karen takes you through the entire digestive system and tells you what's going on in each area from a plant-based perspective. Enzymes, longevity and youth extension, health statistics, history of raw and living foods, And we see the different camps, and then Dr. Karen talks about raw two approaches, the low fruit and the high fruit, how they compare and contrast. Foundations of the raw food diet, food combining, raw food weight loss connection, classic studies in support of plant-based nutrition, Framingham, McDougall, Esselstyn, Ornish, Dr. Campbell's China study. We look at all those classics and we see how they fit into the big picture. We go on to discuss carcinogens that form in foods, certain foods cooked by certain methods, how to avoid them, and if you do include some of those things in your diets, how to minimize the negative effects. More about the effects of heating on food goes into nutrient loss from heating and how you can get things like beta-carotene and lycopene. Even if you decide never to cook your food, it's actually very easy. Organic versus non-organic. Grains and plant families. Why, for example, is quinoa gluten-free when other grains aren't? You know why? Quinoa's in a different plant family, so there's lots and lots of insights to gain there. Making sense of food labels, psychological factors, candida, DHA, xenoestrogens, and phytoestrogens. Juice fasting and water fasting, that's one area where I put my clinical experience as well as some personal experience into the curriculum. Dr. Karen has several sections on superfoods. Are they really super? What's the marketing claim versus the science? Raw food sources of nutrients expanded, raw food exaggerations, the history of human food choices. Was it eating meat and fat that made our brain be big? Was it fruit? Was it starches? Those are the competing theories out there. Dr. Karen goes into a very fair assessment of all of those and tells you the reality, not just the internet hype. Big questions of animal products, importance of sleep, menu planning for various health challenges, expanded view of carbohydrates, more raw food weight loss, sweeteners, the importance of hydration and high water content foods, research in support of raw food nutrition. We look at how raw food diets can lower people's cancer risk, improve their cardiometabolic health, help them recover from diseases like fibromyalgia. So we've got a couple of weeks worth of that. Then Dr. Karen covers nutrient analyses of different plant foods as well as various sample diets, where she looks at some raw food diets, some plant-based diets, paleo, keto, etc. And it's extremely revealing to see what actually comes out of that. I follow the lead from a fatty acid perspective. I look at all different foods and their fatty acid profile, then different diets and how they stack up. We look at a whole bunch of case histories of long-term vegan patients I've worked with special emphasis on omega-3 conversion. So that's another major way I incorporate my clinical experience into the curriculum. More survey of superfoods and supplements, an overview of energy. What happens to excess protein, carbohydrate, and fat when we consume it? What metabolic pathways do they take? Does it depend on other factors? It's very, very revealing. Sea vegetables. Whoa, we need minerals, but we want to avoid those heavy metals. What do? The data's here. Dietary fiber and probiotics and prebiotics covers the microbiome very, very effectively and lets you know how you can support that just by eating a diet that covers so many other bases all at the same time. Borrow a segment used with permission from Dr. Lyle and Goldhammer, my take on the pleasure trap, autonomic nervous system, looking at some of the big pictures of health, overcoming challenges and pitfalls in plant-based and raw food nutrition. From there, we start to go into the educator material of the course. Some of our students educate other people individually as well as teach classes. Most of our students are not interested in doing that. For those students, though, going over this part of the course brings everything together, and it also makes them much more comfortable explaining what they do when people see it's different to friends, family, and coworkers. And a lot of our students are very grateful for that. So before we go into how this content is delivered, wanted to share a couple of student testimonials. Our student Malcolm from the Bronx says, as someone who has adhered to a raw plant-based diet for over 17 years and first began learning about a plant-based diet in the mid-70s, I can honestly say this is one of the most comprehensive courses I have ever witnessed. Carla from Florida, who some of you may remember hearing from on our summit, said, this course was extremely educational. I love how Dr. Rick and Dr. Karen are based on scientific research and show different sides of the arguments. The course teaches you not only about nutrition, but also how to go about all the questions one receives when they change their diet, which is very helpful to be able to cope with normal people. It's a lot of information, very well worth it. She also said separately, thank you for your constant support and education. The conferences were amazing, and I'm going to miss it. So Carla utilizes the information she learned in our course number 1 for her clients who she's teaching to make healthy food. And like she said, just for those normal people who eat normal food, who think you're different. And again, people feel so much more comfortable with the knowledge and the confidence they gain from the course. They're more likely to stick with things over the long term also because they can navigate the waters more easily. Our student Mattis from Estonia said, mastering raw food nutrition is the biggest and most useful raw food course I have seen. My knowledge of physiology and plant-based foods skyrocketed even though I had already been familiar with the topics for 7 years. It helped me to get accurate and balanced information to ultimately fix the consequences of eating an extreme fruitarian diet in the past and become a nutrition counselor in the process. I recommend this course to anyone who is seriously interested in health. So how do we actually go about delivering these kinds of results? So first of all, we have 2 hours worth of professional quality videos per week, very similar to what you're seeing here on this webinar. You watch those at your own schedule, and then every week that 2 more videos come out, or 2 more hours worth of videos come out, the old ones stay there so you can watch them as many times as you want. Now, interestingly, every hour or so that you see in our course is maybe 20, 30, 40 or so hours worth of research and putting things together and looking through articles and making sense of the science and putting the presentations together. So it makes extremely efficient use of your time. You can save yourself decades worth of trial and error and just hone in on the time you spend with us. We also have audio MP3s of the video segments. Not too many of our students take advantage of that, but if you want to just have your phone on while you're out exercising or driving when it doesn't make sense to be able to look at a screen, you can just listen to those as well. You can also have your notebooks open. We share with you 4 separate notebooks, about 900 pages worth of content overall, plus all of the scientific references in the back. These notebooks are designed for a couple of things. They've got the charts and the graphs and the data that you're seeing on the video screen in the notebook, so you don't have to madly try to write everything down that you see on and hear on the videos. You can just look at your notebooks, look at the videos, and let the information sink in. And then they're also lifetime reference material. So we'll take a quick look here. Things are laid out in bullet points. They're not transcripts. It took us a long time to put these together, but our students love them and they really enhance the learning process. So we physically mail you these notes, and then they are lifetime reference material, and we even print the title of the course on the side. You can stack all these up, have them on your bookcase, and always be able to grab them. Each week, we also have interactive quizzes to reinforce the main points of that week's lessons. It's interactive. It gives you the right or wrong answer, and then it gives you explanations, again, to help enhance the learning process. So all those things, the notebooks, the videos, and the quizzes, you access those on your own. And then on Tuesdays, every Tuesday except the last Tuesday of the month, we offer live Zoom video conferences. We have students from all over the world, so we actually have them at 2 different times, 10 a.m. Pacific / 1 a.m. Eastern, which is 7 p.m. Central European time and 8 p.m. Israeli time, is one of our conferences. And the other one is for the sort of after work in the North America crowd, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, super early in the morning in Europe and Israel. So most of our students find that no matter where they are in the world, they can attend one of those conferences each week. Now, when you join us live directly, that's fantastic. But if one of those times don't work for you, you can simply type in your questions in advance of the call, and then we audio record and save each conference. So you can type your questions in advance and then listen to the recording after of the answers to your questions, as well as the answers to your fellow students' questions. And to go back just a second, you can see the outline here under the live conference chapter for each week. You can put in your questions, access the conferences, and then access the recording. So it's very convenient and very handy. We don't abandon you. You get to interact with us directly, either in real time or not, throughout the entire course. So many of our students find that so valuable. In addition, you can interact with us a little more and each other. We have social and study groups in the course. Oftentimes, we will submit information to the study group that supports answering questions during the live conferences. And in the social group, students get to know each other and interact and share recipes and experiences. And it's really nice to be able to connect with a tribe of like-minded people that way. Now, all of this is designed for a fun learning experience where you can feel very confident eating a super healthful diet, and you can enjoy abundant health that allows the greatest enjoyment of your lives. So to summarize, there are 2 hours of professional videos per week, similar to what you're seeing here in the content as well as this part of the webinar. We have the audio-only versions available as well. You've got those notebooks that come along with the entire course, weekly interactive quizzes, near weekly video conferences, social and study groups to interact more with us and your fellow students, all designed to give you the knowledge and confidence to keep on track to truly have a lifetime of supercharged health. We'll also mention that we offer a certificate of completion for those students who take 3 exams, and this is separate from the quizzes, and submit a good quality final project. About 50% of our students go through this process. For those students who want to go out and educate other people, they want this certificate to let their people know, their clients and their students, that they took a very comprehensive course and they're serious about what they're doing, and they can most effectively guide other people. Most of our students aren't going out to educate others. They just want this information for themselves, and a lot of them feel like they're spending this time to put in this effort. They want to get a certificate of completion also. You know, speaking of people who want to go out and educate others, we've had several raw food, social media celebrities and educators join us for the course to bring their knowledge up a few levels, and we're always honored when that happens. So there we go. People are jumping for joy. Okay, before finishing up, I have one last testimonial to share. And this is from our student Rena, who lives a couple hours south of us. She said, anybody wanting to make long-term sustainable changes to their diet and nutrition must take this course. There is so much nonsense out there on the internet that it's easy to get confused. I don't know of anyone who has done so much extensive research in every field of nutrition. The best part is they do not give their own opinions, just science and data. They inform and then leave it to us to make our decisions. They permanently changed my relationship with food. I am so much more comfortable with my choices. They do not talk about extremes, and they do not judge and make anyone feel guilty for their choices. They answer all questions calmly and without judgment. It was their love and tolerance for all that brought us all so much closer. I am emotionally and physically so much healthier because of this course. My habits are changing slowly and steadily. I am much happier and calmer person because of this course and because of Dr. Rick and Dr. Karen. This is the best investment I have ever made. I wish the course could go on, but all good things have to end. And then Rena said separately, Dr. Rick and Dr. Karen, you are sent from heaven for us. So we're just so heartfelt and honored when we hear these kind of testimonials. And you know, when you see the ads on TV for weight loss and it always says in the little fine print below, results not typical. This is not one of those situations. Every year that we teach this class, we have several students like Rena who are that grateful, who it's made that much of a difference for. We have lots of other testimonials when you click on our testimonial tab from each class. And again, this is part of what keeps us doing what we do, because it means so much to us to be able to enhance people's qualities of lives that much. So we want to thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar. We hope you have found it informative and useful, and please keep an eye on your email for our July and August webinars coming up as well. Now that we've finished the webinar, for those of you here with us live, after a brief intermission, we'll be here to answer questions about our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition curriculum, about the content of the webinar, or plant-based and raw food nutrition questions in general. For those of you considering joining us, you can click on the schedule link that's on your screen right now, which will allow you to set up a time to discuss with us individually if Mastering Raw Food Nutrition is a good fit for you, and vice versa. We look forward to speaking with you soon, and we'll be back in just a couple of minutes to answer questions.